I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
In the 7 years that Paige and I have been friends, we have shared true crime stories that we are obsessed with. This podcast is a hobby discussing the intricate details of true crime cases. Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised. Dorothea Puente was a con artist who targeted disabled, homeless, and elderly tenants. She murdered these people and continued cashing their Social Security checks and pension checks. Her calm grandma persona allowed her to get away with the murders until a tenant was reported missing in 1988, and her scheme started to unravel. Dorothea Puente is nicknamed the Death House Landlady, the Black Widow of Sacramento, and the Grandma Serial Killer. This episode does include details on sexual assault, including assault of minors. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California. Dorothea's parents were Jesse James Gray and Trudy Mae Yates. She was the sixth out of 7 children. This is the very beginning of the Great Depression. The Gray family was already living in extreme poverty at this point, and Jesse and Trudy were both working at a plant that packaged oranges. At some point, they lose their jobs either due to the Great Depression or to poor attendance from alcoholism. When the kids were allowed out of the house, the children were searching the dumpster for food and wandering the streets. And at some point in the 1930s, Dorothea was sexually assaulted while wandering the streets when she was between 2 and 5 years old.
Those poor kids.
Yeah. All of them, when they were even allowed to leave the house, they're in the house, they're very hungry. When they're even allowed to leave the house, they're scrummaging through dumpsters, things like that. They talk about how Dorothea was the youngest, she's the smallest, she had the smallest legs, she couldn't get away from these bad men, and that's how she ends up being assaulted. The older kids could get away, and she just couldn't. She's a baby. They just had a every man for themselves mentality. It's just survivalism, that's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to 1937, Jesse attempted suicide in front of Dorothea. We know that she was less than 8 years old at the time of the suicide attempt, because Jesse died of tuberculosis when Dorothea was 8 years old in 1937. Tuberculosis is an infectious disease caused by bacteria that most often affects the lungs. It spreads through the air when people with TB cough, sneeze, or spit. In 2023, 1.25 million people died from tuberculosis. This is actually the world's leading cause of death from a single infectious agent, following 3 years that it was replaced by COVID.
So, that's scary.
I know. It's a sneaky killer. I don't know that I've ever heard of anyone here getting tuberculosis.
Have you ever got tested for one?
I have not. I'm vaxxed.
So they stick a needle under the first layer of your skin until it bubbles up.
Gross.
And they just leave it there. And I guess, I don't know how they really test the fact that you would have TB or not, but it's there. It's like a little bump and it eventually goes away. But under the first layer of skin, no thank you.
Are you vaccinated against tuberculosis?
I think so.
And you still got tested for it?
Maybe. I don't know. It was for a old folks home, I think.
Oh,
so that's probably why they wanted to double check.
They say there's a huge percentage of people that have TB and they just don't know that they have it until they start getting more severe symptoms. So that could be maybe being vaccinated is not actually keeping us as safe as we think it is.
Maybe.
After Jesse's death, Trudy worked as a prostitute and lost custody of the 7 children. In 1938, just a year after his death, Trudy died in a motorcycle accident. The children, including 9-year-old Dorothea, were sent to an orphanage. While at the orphanage, Dorothea was sexually assaulted again. Eventually, relatives from Fresno, California, found out about the deaths of Jesse and Trudy and took in all 7 kids. But just a short time later, the kids were taken away and sent out to foster homes again. And they were all split up. And we're unsure why the kids were removed from the home and split up. We do know that Dorothea was taken in by some Mexican families, either at this point as a foster child or prior to that when she was scrummaging through the dumpsters and things like that. These families taught her how to cook, and they left just a good family impression that seemed to be something that Dorothea strives for the rest of her life. So she's going to tell people that she's Mexican, she's going to adopt a last name that's Mexican, and even in police interrogations later, she's like, oh, I was born Dorothea Puente. And that's not true. She was born Dorothea Gray.
And Trudy used to put her 7 kids in a closet, go get drunk, and then come back and, of course, get sick from being so drunk. So there's vomit everywhere, and then only lets the kids out when they clean up her vomit.
So you got 7 kids in a closet.
Sinister mom right there.
Yeah, there's definitely some history of abuse that I think we see coming forward in Dorothea later. She just didn't have that typical upbringing of a child.
In 1938, Dorothea started at a new grade school. She tells classmates that she is from Mexico. Her primary language is Spanish, and she needs tutors and translators to complete her homework. Dorothea was living in Olympia, Washington, in 1945. She worked as a prostitute and at a milkshake bar. Fred McFall had returned to the States from World War II. 22-year-old Fred hired 16-year-old Dorothea and fell in love with her. They went to Reno to get married. Dorothea signed the wedding license under an alias, saying she was a 30-year-old widow.
I think this is the first recorded time that we have of Dorothea truly lying about her identity.
Mm-hmm.
In a legal way. You know, as a kid in school, that's kind of one thing. It's a strange lie to tell in school that she's Mexican and she needs all of her homework translated. But this one, she's signing her marriage license with a complete false identity. And Fred would talk about later how really surprised he was at this quick response that she made up this whole alias, basically like, oh yeah, I'm 30. I'm a widow. My husband's already died.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that she looked 30. She's 16.
Yeah, I think that was a way to protect herself because of her upbringing, maybe. That was just her kind of, response to deal with things.
Just make up a new identity.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was also something that she really wanted. Marrying Fred would have had a lot of opportunities for her. You know, she's working as a prostitute. She's working at a milkshake bar. This isn't really a life that she would want for herself, but if she's following in her mom's footsteps, it's all that she would know how to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so marrying Fred, coming back from the war, he would have a job, provided some stability for her. Better than being on your own, right?
Yeah. I know I would be able to tell the difference between a 30-year-old and a 16-year-old, though.
Even later, though, when she's talking about being in her 70s and she's only in her 50s, she
dressed up.
She plays the part.
Or dressed down.
She dresses like a nice old grandma.
Dorothea and Fred's daughter, Diane Lorraine, was born in September 1946. Dorothea was just 17 years old.
She's 17 years old, doesn't have any motherly figures in her life to show her the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
Those Mexican families, but that's pretty much all she would have had. The foster parents maybe that took her in, but I'm not sure that any of them really stick either. So she's really winging it. She's very young. 17.
Yeah, she doesn't know any better. Mm-mm. Less than a year after Diane was born, a second daughter was born. Melody Jean was born in August 1947. Dorothea goes into labor while Fred is at work. Dorothea doesn't call Fred to let him know she's in labor, but gives the baby up for adoption before he even gets to meet her. This is the last straw for Fred, and he divorces Dorothea. There's a third pregnancy that ends in miscarriage while Dorothea is married to Fred, but it's unknown if this baby was also Fred's. Okay, so in 1948, Dorothea was arrested with forging checks and sentenced to 6 months in jail. After her jail release, Dorothea got pregnant a fourth time by a man she hardly knew. This baby was also given up for adoption.
Yep, so here you have all 3 babies all given up for adoption.
They probably had a better life, I hate to say it, than
Agreed.
To stay with Dorothea, knowing what we know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they all had a better life. The one daughter, I can't really tell if it's Melody or if it's this baby that was given up, comes back at Dorothea's trial and has a relationship with her later as an adult that I feel like is probably a more healthy relationship, having been given up, than to have lived through the stuff that Dorothea is about to unravel in front of her. Because
if she did live with her, don't you think maybe she wouldn't have been so supportive? Mm-hmm. Because she would have seen things possibly.
And Dorothea's in and out of jail a lot, so she probably, any one of these babies would not have been able to stay there anyways. In 1950, Dorothea was working as a sex worker in Sacramento. She married Axel Johansson in 1952, and they stayed married for 14 years. Axel was in the Navy. When he was deployed, sometimes for weeks at a time, Dorothea would be drunk. At one point, Axel comes home, finds the house a mess. He beats Dorothea and tells her that she needs to keep the house clean. And in 1950s housewife mentality, she does keep the house clean after that. Just craziness.
He whipped her into shape.
Literally whipped her into shape, yeah.
I mean, I would just leave. But then again, I wasn't, in the 1950s.
Yeah.
So I can't really say much.
And I think this is how their marriage is. One of them is always, it goes both ways. One of them is always beating on the other one. They're always fighting. It's just very tumultuous for 14 years. In the 1960s, Dorothea was arrested for owning and operating a brothel.
And for those who don't know, a brothel is a house where men can visit prostitutes. I did not know that. I had to look it up.
Angela's learning some things in this podcast. We've got hostels and brothels now.
I'm a pure rose. I'm innocent.
Until this podcast, we dived into the deep, deep corrupt people here.
I enjoy it, though.
Yeah, it's good. She leased an office space on Fulton Avenue in Sacramento. Dorothea would call truckers and receive calls from truckers at this office. She was sentenced to 90 days in the Sacramento jail. It's a unique setup that she has here.
Mm-hmm.
The police talk about how it was a little bit more tricky to catch her because she's working out of an office and these truckers were calling in. It's not your typical brothel type situation.
Yeah, like it's more organized.
Mm-hmm. She really thought outside the box. After her release, she was arrested again for vagrancy and sentenced to another 90 days. She then started managing boarding houses and taking care of disabled and elderly people. And she's doing all of this while Axel is away serving in the military. So he has no idea that she's operating a brothel. I'm assuming he knew that she was in and out of jail at this point. That's a little harder to cover up.
Yeah, I would assume so.
In 1966, Dorothea and Axel divorced. And when she decides she's done with him, she cleans the house, locks up, and walks away. Which I feel like is one of her most classy moves.
Yeah, I would expect her to just leave the house completely mangled and...
A hot mess.
Yeah.
He's away in the military. I'm leaving milk in the fridge. But she cleans the house.
Grabbing her red coat and suitcase and flipping the bird.
Not Dorothea. She took the high road here.
For now.
For now.
Later in 1966, 37-year-old Dorothea married Roberto Puente. Roberto was around 20 years younger than Dorothea.
It's possible that Dorothea married Roberto because he gave her that Mexican last name, and Roberto married Dorothea because he wanted to obtain U.S. citizenship. She keeps the Puente last name for years to come. This is one that she holds on to.
So she had the severe urge to become like a Mexican.
Or
to present herself, at least like that on paper.
On paper, yeah. And she makes lots of Mexican food. Like, she really accepts this as her origin. And it's really not. I mean, she's a white girl. Mm-hmm. But she really, really wanted to be Mexican.
Well, if I was brought up the way she was, I would want something to attach onto. I don't know if I would go to the lengths that she did.
I'm not going to marry poor Roberto just for his last name.
No.
She could have just changed her name. That's so much easier.
Talk about a cougar. She was a cougar to him.
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't know what age she's pretending to be at this point either. She's 37. Is she pretending to be 27?
Oh my, that's right. Dorothea and Roberto divorced in 1968. So they were only married for 2 years.
Less than 2 years. Yep.
In 1976, Dorothea married Pedro Montalvo. No divorce date is known for them. In 1978, Dorothea started renting a home on 1200 F Street, Sacramento. She took on the role of caregiver for the other tenants in the boarding house in 1981. Dorothea was also a part-time cook at the Flame Club in 1981. Dorothea met Ruth Monroe after working with Ruth's boyfriend Harold at the Flame Club. In 1982, Dorothea and Ruth opened a cafe or small restaurant together, and Dorothea requested they open a joint bank account. She also kept asking Ruth to put money into the account.
Which would make sense, to open a joint bank account. They own a cafe or restaurant together. Dorothea is also aware that Ruth has some money, which makes her the perfect target.
Poor Ruth.
Yep. Dorothea goes out of her way to seem like a good friend and a good business partner, even telling Ruth's kids to call her grandma. Which is gross because Dorothea is pretending to be older than she is. Dorothea is 53 years old at this point, and Ruth is 61. This is 1982.
That's just terrible.
She runs a long game here.
Poor Ruth, though. Yep. I feel for her and her family. In April, Ruth's boyfriend was diagnosed with terminal cancer and required to live full-time in the hospital. Dorothea recommended Ruth move into the 1200 F Street home so she wouldn't be alone. Ruth moved in on Easter Sunday, 1982. Ruth's son, Bill, would visit Ruth every day after work. 3 days before her death, Bill said she was acting like she didn't feel well. Ruth was drinking a special creme de menthe drink that Dorothea had made her to calm her nerves. So this would probably be difficult to kind of smell like a chemical agent in the drink.
The mint is going to cover it up.
Because the mint is so like minty fresh.
Yeah, and you know I love mint.
Oh, yeah.
I looked up this creme de menthe. And
you gonna make it for me?
With or without the drugs.
We should have had a creme de menthe.
We should have.
Here.
Yeah. We absolutely should have. Yeah.
We gotta think of that for the future ones. Get into the zone.
Drink like our poor victims.
Yes.
I looked up a recipe for creme de menthe, and there's a zinger drink recipe which combines 2 ounces of vodka and 2 ounces of creme de menthe. I think would sound amazing, but reviews of it said it tasted like Listerine.
I love Listerine, but I wouldn't want to, swallow it.
Drink it. Yeah, I'm not sure that that's something you want to sit down and have a drink to. But it's also known that Ruth is not a drinker. Mm-hmm. I think this was the perfect drink for Dorothea to cover up the drugs that she's putting in.
And that probably raised a red flag for Bill. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, my mom doesn't drink at all.
And now she's acting funny.
Mm-hmm.
I think it did raise a red flag for him. But Dorothea just kind of explained it away like, oh, we're under a lot of stress. She's really depressed. She just needs a drink.
Mm-hmm.
Which is justified. She did have a lot going on.
At Bill's last visit, Ruth laid in her bed, unable to speak with nothing but tears streaming down her face. Just 2 weeks after Ruth moved in, on April 26, 1982, she died in a reported overdose of codeine and acetaminophen. Dorothea called the coroner to let them know her roommate had committed suicide. She swung the excuse to the police that Ruth had been depressed because the cafe was failing and it was ruled a suicide at the time.
Dorothea was able to just call the coroner and say, oh, she's depressed. This is clearly a suicide. And they were like, okay, no problem.
1980s, man.
We'll just come pick up her body. No problem here. Codeine is usually used in a combination with other drugs to control coughing.
Have you ever tried codeine?
I'm sure it's been in some kind of a cough medicine that I've taken.
Yeah, I've tried codeine, like real good stuff, codeine. Because, I was a pharmacy tech, so I knew the real good stuff in the bag.
They give out free samples to you there?
No, no, I saw it back there and I was like, this might help, because I had a really deep cough at the time and it was very harsh on my lungs. And then I took that stuff and I fell asleep and I didn't cough the whole night. And it was just like, I could see how people can overdose on that stuff.
Really? Yeah, symptoms of codeine overdose are unresponsiveness, slow, shallow breathing, and gurgling.
Mm-hmm.
So just put you right to sleep, huh?
It put me right to sleep. So just take the recommended dose if you decide to get codeine. But I don't think they sell it anymore.
Really?
Like in the bottle that I had. It might be in specific.
Like mixed with something.
Yeah.
They're diluting it down now.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth's son had said that she was almost unresponsive the last time he had seen her, which does make sense with the unresponsiveness, slow, shallow breathing.
Mm-hmm.
She was showing signs of overdose. He just, didn't realize what he was seeing. It takes 750 to 900 milligrams to overdose on codeine, and it is very similar to heroin. Wow. Dorothea, she's pretending to be a doctor at this time, so I'm not sure what her end game here was, if she just knew that Ruth had some money, if she had emptied out the joint bank account and Ruth knew about it. I'm not sure what her motive was to kill Ruth. there was something. We just don't know what. And Dorothea will never admit to killing her anyways.
Was there a possible strong friendship between them two? Maybe. And she did see, I don't know, I'm trying to be optimistic here, but maybe she did see Ruth in a depressive state because her husband had terminal cancer. So maybe Dorothea, in her sick mind, was like, I can take all your pain away.
Maybe.
And drug her and kill her.
Maybe. Or maybe she was experimenting with the drugs and it just went too far.
That's a good thought.
With the amount of days that Bill comes to visit and Ruth is unresponsive or just getting sicker and sicker, I don't know if it would be that so much as with Dorothea. I think it's probably a cash grab. There's some asset there that Dorothea wanted, or there was something that was about to fall that Ruth knew about and she had to get rid of her. I'm not that optimistic about Dorothea.
No sympathy.
I don't have a whole lot for
whatsoever. At 6 a.m. on the day Ruth died, Dorothea called Ruth's daughter to come pick up her mom's belongings. When Ruth's daughter arrived, all there was to pick up was an empty purse. Dorothea had also drained the joint bank account and stolen the rest of Ruth's belongings. A few weeks later, 74-year-old Malcolm Mackenzie met Dorothea at a bar. Malcolm had 2 drinks at the bar before Dorothea came home with him. Once at home, Malcolm started to feel strange. He became temporarily paralyzed, but was able to see Dorothea robbing him. She took money, checks, and jewelry. So she literally walks, while Malcolm is like paralyzed here, she walks up to him and steals the ring off his finger, is what he said.
Yeah. How terrifying that had to be for him.
Yeah.
Because he's laying there probably thinking like, am I going to die? Will I be paralyzed forever? And she's just robbing him blind. She's robbing him. He's seeing it. She's still posing as a doctor, so she's carrying around that medical bag with her props in it like a stethoscope and obviously handing out drugs. She actually has patients that are being seen by her as a medical professional, and she has no degree. She has a prop.
I guess you could get away with that back then. On May 9th, 1982, Dorothea was incarcerated for grand theft, forgery, and administering stupefying drugs to 3 victims.
Dorothea was back in jail on August 18th, 1982. She was convicted of 3 more charges of theft. She pleads guilty to fraud charges for forging Social Security checks and cashing them. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While in jail, Dorothea began writing to Everson Gilmeth as a pen pal. Everson was a lonely 77-year-old widow from Oregon. Dorothea was 24 years younger than Everson.
Okay, so we're swapping it a little bit. She's younger this time.
Yeah.
Than poor Everson.
Age is really not a problem for her.
Because you never know what age she's portraying.
What age is she really? Who knows?
You're 20? I could be a 20-year-old.
She can pull it off, so yeah. Dorothea was released from prison after serving 3 of her 5-year sentence on September 9th, 1985. Dorothea and Everson move into the upstairs of 1426 F Street, Sacramento. Everson thought they were planning to get married. As part of Dorothea's parole, she was not allowed to work with elderly people, she's not allowed to run a boarding house, and she's not to be involved with Social Security payments or pensions. Right out the door, Dorothea makes Everson add her to his bank account, and he starts signing his pension checks over to her. So much for that, no handling pensions or Social Security checks.
And she can't work with elderly people, but she can date them.
It's a valid point. It's very valid. They couldn't stop her from having love. And Everson, he really thinks that they're in love.
Do they read, like, when there's a pen pal? What am I trying to say? When there's a pen pal, like, relationship or just a letter going to prison, do they reread those, or do they, like, proofread them, or whatever you call it? Do they...
Like, do the prison officials read the letters?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
before... Okay.
There is no privacy in prison.
So if that person, whoever read it, and they were like, Everson's 77 years old here, maybe we should warn him.
Nope. To be fair, he realized he was writing somebody in prison.
He was just lonely.
I know.
Poor Everson.
I know. I really love Everson in this. Like, his heart is so in the right place. He just ends up with Dorothea.
Yeah.
Gets taken advantage of. Even here where she's acting like she's going to marry him. I don't think she has any intention to ever marry him.
Oh, no.
She just wants that pension check. She
Yeah.
looked at his age and was like, you're going to have, Social Security, or you're going to have a pension. And he just signs it right over to her. She's also, at 1426, she's involved in a boarding house again. She's taking in these people and caring for them, while the authorities would still have check-ins. But it was really hard for them to track her because she was under 4 different names. She's Dorothea McFall. She's Dorothea Johansson. She's Dorothea Puente. She's Dorothea Maltavo. And it's really hard for 1980s police to keep track of which Dorothea and which one has the felonies.
Yeah.
The house at 1426 F Street was a 3-story, 16-bedroom boarding house. The basement and first floor was the boarding house, and the second floor was Dorothea's living quarters. She was paying $600 a month in upstairs apartment rent. She would collect rent for the boarding house by requiring some of the tenants to sign over their Social Security checks, and she often became a payee for the boarders, in which she had the authority to sign the checks and place them in the bank. Other tenants paid her monthly rent checks. She would keep most of the money for herself, then pay the rent to Rodrigo Ordorica, her quote-unquote nephew. Rodrigo was not actually related to Dorothea, but they loved her and treated her as family. She was kind to her neighbors. She really played up that nice old lady next door gimmick. Every Thursday was burrito day at the house, so she had homemade burritos. But they're free to anybody in the neighborhood. Anybody that came over could have a free meal.
Who knows? She probably laced them with something.
I think it fit her end game nicely. She's just that nice lady on F Street that gives away free food every Thursday. You can go there for a meal. By the way, if you need a place to stay, she's got a bed over here that you can rent.
It's a cover.
She took in a lot of boarders that were alcoholics, homeless, people who had mental disabilities. She specialized in people that had no contact with their family. She claimed that she was independently wealthy and just liked helping people. She was loved by her community and loved by politicians. She would donate to political campaigns and also local charities. She took in people that were hard to find a placement for. So to social workers, she's the dream. These alcoholics or these people that can't find a place, social workers loved her because she would just take them all in. It's a perfect con, right? She's the nice grandma that's helping out the disabled and the elderly people. Late in 1986, Dorothea hired a handyman, Ishmael Flores, to install wood paneling in her apartment. For his labor, she gave him a red pickup truck and $800 cash, which is a lot of money for putting up paneling in your apartment.
And a whole truck, too.
The truck was Everson's. Dorothea then asked the handyman to build a 6-foot by 3-foot by 2-foot box to store books in.
Now I would question that.
Come on, Ishmael. There's clearly some flags here. She just paid you a truck and $800 cash for wood paneling. I know that was big in the 80s, put up the wood paneling everywhere. But then he basically makes a coffin, and he doesn't think anything about it. It's like, oh, this nice old lady wants me to build this coffin-shaped box for books.
Is Ishmael Mexican?
I believe so. This is right before Christmas, 1986. Ishmael is probably just needing some money for Christmas, and this looked like a great job. Once the box is completed, Dorothea asked the handyman to help her take the now 300-pound box to a storage unit. Dorothea nailed the box shut on top, and it's so heavy that they have to ask a neighbor to help load it into the truck. She changes her mind on the way to the storage unit and tells Ishmael that it's just junk and actually we can just leave it in this spot next to the river. Dorothea and Ishmael leave the coffin at a trash drop-off along the river. It's like a common junk drop-off where homeowners would leave like appliances and couches and just household junk. But the problem is that the box is too heavy for Dorothea and Ishmael alone, so it's left sitting on the bank and never does make it to the water.
Uh-oh.
Yep. Ishmael never asked what's in the box. Dorothea told him it was books, and he didn't want to get into the nice old lady's business.
Well, and the fact that she nailed it shut herself, like you're not going to ask the handyman to nail it?
Nope.
That's his job.
300 pounds, and she thinks that they're just going to be able to just lift this out of the truck, the two of them. This sweet 70-year-old lady able to lift this 300-pound box. A fisherman walking on the bank opened the box and found Everson's body wrapped in plastic and sheets on New Year's Day, 1987.
Poor Everson.
Yeah. Everson was not identified and was considered a John Doe until 1988. Dorothea continued cashing Everson's pension checks and wrote to his family for 2 years pretending to be Everson and just saying that he was sick. Everson's sister was suspicious. She didn't like the idea of him moving to California with Dorothea from the beginning. And after not hearing from Everson for a while, his sister requested that Sacramento police do a wellness check. We don't know if Everson was still alive at this point, but the man who called the sister said that he was fine and don't worry about him. He got huffy and upset with her, and she never heard from him again after that. So I'm not sure if this was Everson himself, just like, I'm fine, please give me some space, or if this was a tenant at the house that Dorothea had convinced to call. I'm not sure.
Did they do an autopsy on Everson's body? Do we know? Like, how did he die?
I am not sure. I believe that he had an overdose. Dorothea keeps him on her floor for weeks while his body decomposes. She wraps him in plastic. She wraps him in sheets so well that the neighbor and Ishmael don't smell anything when they're lifting that box. Because, that box would be right beside their face. And they don't smell a thing. Mm-hmm. So in Ishmael's defense, if you're thinking this is a coffin, this is probably a body, you would assume that you would smell something, and he never smelled a thing. Police do grill Ishmael later. Like, they really thought that he was an accomplice. And there are no charges filed against him. He was just kind of wrong place, wrong time, believing the nice old lady gimmick. There is a 9-minute video made by Sacramento police showing the size and condition of the box on December 10th, 1988. The Gilmouth box has round stains to the plywood from where Everson was placed in the fetal position in the box. The video also shows the plastic that was wrapped around Everson, which appears to be clear plastic with black trash bags and cloth. In the 1988 video, you can still see appliances and a couch that were left right where the box was found. The key to this is that we know Everson died and was placed in the fetal position and then put in the box in the fetal position. I believe there's stains on her floor that were very similar, and then the stains in the box. This is found on a very busy roadway. As you're watching the video, you can see just cars flying left and right in front of the police officers. The video is out there on VHS. So they've got this huge camcorder on their shoulders. You can tell it's on his shoulder because it's, probably a 5-foot or 6-foot police officer, and he's standing at the top, and the camcorder's angled at the top of this 6-foot box. And you just hear him kind of like coughing. Everybody's smoking cigarettes. They make some kind of joke like, well, guess we should narrate this video here. Like, they're so unaccustomed to recording video of crime scenes in 1988 when this is taken. It's just, the video is so eerie. Like, you're watching normal cars flying up and down the roadway as the police are looking through this box.
Discovering Everson's body.
Connecting it. Well, at this point, this is December 10th, 1988, that this video was made. And he was found on January 1st, 1987. So they left the box there.
Ew.
Mm-hmm. The box, the cloth, the plastic is all still at the river's edge where it was on January 1st, 87.
That's like evidence.
Yeah. On a John Doe case. I'm
Luckily,
not sure
it was
if they
still
protected
there.
it. That's true. Nobody was stealing this coffin. How did they secure it for that time? I don't know. It's a very eerie video.
And Dorothea's hope was that the evidence was to be, swept away by the water?
Away. The water at this river rises in the winter. So her hope was to get the box close to the water so that if it doesn't wash away, it is 300 pounds. So if the water does not rush it away, the water would come up and start to decompose Everson's body, break it down a lot faster, get rid of a lot of the evidence, which didn't happen because the box was so dang heavy they couldn't get it to the water. This poor fisherman on New Year's Day in 87, though, he looked at that box and he thought, boy, that looks like a coffin. That's literally what he told the police. Like,
Duh.
Light bulb, it looks like a coffin. And so he pries it open and was like, oh snap, that's a body in there, and immediately goes and calls the police.
Maybe the fisherman should have stayed and was like, maybe you guys should take the box with the body.
Do you guys want to take this here box as well? He has the common sense that's clearly missing.
In fact, just take the couch too, and then just everything.
Right. Actually, can we clean up this whole area?
I bet you that's what would have happened nowadays. They would have
Taken the box.
Taken everything. Not just the box, but everything surrounding it.
Probably. Because you don't know what footprints even leading down to it.
If they leaned on the couch, maybe that's a little bit of the DNA.
Yeah, I think they would have done a more forensic look at it than this is 1987.
Yeah. We were learning.
Yeah. We had that giant 12-pound camcorder on our shoulder.
And the cigarettes in our other hand.
All of them. Every video that I watch, those like VHS videos, every single one of those police officers has a cigarette in their hand.
Sometime between 1986 and 1988, Dorothea hired a handyman named Chief. Chief was known in the area for being a homeless alcoholic man. Dorothea hired Chief to take dirt out of the basement, take down a garage in the backyard, and install a new concrete pad. Soon after the work is done, Chief also disappears. He must have dug his own grave.
I think he literally dug his own grave, yeah.
Dorothea's scheme started to unravel in 1988. Alvaro Gonzalez Montoya, known as Bert, became one of Dorothea's tenants. Bert had intellectual disabilities, schizophrenia, and heard voices in his head. Bert was born in Costa Rica and came to New Orleans with his family when he was 16. Medication didn't work for Bert, and his parents placed him in a mental institution that gave him shock therapy. He left the mental institution and ran away from his home, then somehow ended in Sacramento. Bert lived in a place for detox of alcoholism, which he wasn't an alcoholic, but it was better than a boarding home for the mentally ill. Judy Moise was Bert's volunteer social worker. Judy had heard about Dorothea Puente and was very well recommended to Bert. Dorothea was described to Judy as a wonderful lady that takes really good care of her clients. When they arrived at Dorothea's home to meet her, she had a box of kittens that she fed with bottles of milk. Dorothea told Judy and Bert he needed to receive Social Security checks in order for him to pay for room and board. Bert had no connection with his family, so, Dorothy told them she would be his payee. Bert and Judy were impressed by this.
What a nice little old lady that's just going to help him out, manage his money for him, give him food and a place to stay. Also, she has these cute little kittens.
And I just thought of this. Kittens pee, has a lot of ammonia. And that smell is really, really raunchy. I don't know if you've ever experienced that smell, but it's terrible. It's terrible. The ammonia in it is like you die.
Cats are not my jam.
So imagine that could be also like Ishmael's, it's the reason why he didn't smell, Everson's body. Maybe he just thought of if she had a group of,
the house
or
smells
a litter
like cats.
of cats or kittens, that it was maybe just ammonia from that.
Maybe. Bert is also another person that doesn't have family, and she's able to just easily con him and his volunteer social worker out of his monthly Social Security amount. In the beginning, Bert was thriving in Dorothea's care, but after a few months, Bert was asking employees of the detox center to get him out of the boarding house. When Bert disappeared, Dorothea told Judy that Bert wasn't living there anymore. Bert had gone to Mexico and would be back maybe next Friday. When Judy called the following Friday, Dorothea said he wasn't back yet, but don't worry about it, maybe next week. Judy told Dorothea she would call the police that following Monday to report a missing person. So Judy does warn her, and it gives Dorothea some time here. On Monday, Judy received a call from a man named Don Anthony that told her Bert was no longer at the house. He had come home from Mexico, and his family had come to pick him up, which Judy knew was a lie right out the gate, because she knows Bert very well. She knows that he has no family to come and pick him up.
Yeah.
Well, she thinks that she knows him very well. He does actually end up having family out there that we find out later, but there was no way for her to know that someone was looking for him.
And who was portraying as Don Anthony, too? Do we think it's Rodrigo? I don't know. It could be anybody.
Any man in the house that she maybe paid or told them
she'd kill them if they don't do it.
Maybe. They did get a little bit of an allowance. She would take all of their Social Security or all of their pension, and then she would give them an allowance back. So maybe she was giving them money, extra money. Hey, can you make this phone call? Pretend to be this person. Tell them that Bert's fine so I can get this lady off my back. Judy was very familiar with Bert and his history, and she knew right away that something was wrong. Like we said, there's no family to pick up Bert, so she finds John Sharp, an elderly man that was living with Dorothea as well, and she asked about Bert. John said, quote, "He's not there anymore." And when she asked about Mexico, John said, quote, "None of them went to Mexico." Judy also asked if something was wrong with where John lived, and he said, "Yeah, something is wrong here. Dorothea has been digging a lot of holes." None of them went to Mexico.
Yeah, John knows something, for sure.
John is just there trying to get his feet under him. He's not mentally disabled. He's not an alcoholic. He's just retired trying to get his feet on the ground again.
Oh, I didn't know he wasn't an alcoholic. I just assumed so, I guess.
Well, it's a cheap place to stay, basically.
Yeah.
Judy also received a letter from Bert's relatives saying that he was in Utah with them. This makes sense for Dorothea's motive. Here, this is something she had done before, sending letters to Everson Gilmuth's family, claiming that he was all right. So she tries to do the same thing for Bert, but Judy is just not buying this.
Yeah.
Judy became a problem for Dorothea. She wouldn't give up until she found out what really happened to Bert. Which, way to go, Judy. She helps unravel this whole case. She really puts a stop to it because she will not give up.
Yeah.
She's just a volunteer. She's not being paid. She's just trying to help him. Out of the goodness of her heart, help these people get off the streets. Eventually, Dorothea contacts Judy and tells her to come to the house on November 5th, 1988. Dorothea says she's going to turn Bert over to Judy, and basically that she's done with this problem. She wants Bert off of her property. Judy felt that if she went over there, Dorothea was going to get rid of her. Instead, she went to the police and made a police report.
That was smart.
She's incredibly smart. She was street smart enough at this point that she had looked in the yard at 1426 F Street. When she makes that police report, she tells them that it looks like a burial ground in the yard and to bring shovels with them. On November 11th, 1988, 2 officers and a parole officer visited Dorothea about the missing persons report. Dorothea answered the door and said, "I've been expecting you." Officer John Cabrera asked what type of establishment 1426 F Street was, and Dorothea responded by saying, "Jim, I'm in violation of my parole." She then admits to not being allowed to run a boarding house as part of her parole. No mention of the bodies in the yard, though. And when investigators searched her premises, they found blue pills everywhere. These were prescribed for people with sleeping disorders.
Dorothea and all who were living at the home had the same story, that Bert left with a relative. However, another tenant, John Sharp, slipped a note to the officer that said, "She wants me to lie to you." John then was taken in for questioning. Before leaving the property, the officers obtained Dorothea's permission to dig in the backyard. They showed up with 2 shovels and also borrowed one from Dorothea. All 3 officers dig up pieces of garbage, eggshells, paper, and cigarette butts. Officer Cabrera starts to dig and finds cloth and bits that look like leather. He thinks he's digging up a tree root, so he climbs in the hole and pulls. Once dislodged, he realizes it's a human femur bone. Investigators found the severely decomposed body of 78-year-old Leona Carpenter, another tenant at the boarding house.
The police didn't know whose body they had found at this time. No one was looking for Leona. She had no family to know that she was missing. Later, we find out that the tenants of the house were told to throw trash over some of the graves and under this 25-foot avocado tree, which is that big tree that Officer Cabrera, thinking he's pulling on an avocado tree root. And it's not. I guess this tree is an anomaly. Avocado trees don't get this big.
So is sucking the life out of these victims underground.
It was a well-fertilized avocado tree, apparently.
Did she eat the avocados?
Is that like cannibalism?
I mean, I don't know how I feel about this.
Officer Cabrera talks about how huge this tree was and that he has never seen an avocado tree that big, still to this day, in Sacramento. They just don't grow that big. So I'm assuming that the bodies underneath of it were providing a form of fertilizer. And I'm sure that she ate the avocados. She's not going to waste free food.
Circle of life. Dorothea and John Sharp were both taken to the police department for questioning. Dorothea's interrogation starts at 12:30 p.m. on November 11th, 1988, after the first body is found. Dorothea is interviewed by John Cabrera. John asks if Dorothea needs water. She responds no. He appears to walk out of the room, and Dorothea reaches across the desk to turn or touch his coffee cup. Ew.
It was horrifying to me watching that video. So I'm like, oh my gosh, don't drink it. Don't drink out of your cup. I'm not sure if she was playing up that old lady card and he was giving her more trust than she deserved at that point. Was he maybe not treating her as a true suspect? There was nothing at that point to show that she had done anything wrong. The body of Leona is severely decomposed. There's a lot of people living in that house. They can't say that Dorothea has done anything wrong.
Yep.
Dorothea tells police that she was born Dorothea Puente, not a married last name. John told Dorothea he would dig more, and he thought he was going to find more bodies. She responds, well, if you do, I didn't put them there. Stone cold. Detective Cabrera says she doesn't act guilty, she's not sweating, she doesn't avert her eyes. She just looks him dead in the eye and says, well, if you do, I didn't put them there. She's also, like I said, lying about her last name. When she's questioned about Bert, John tells Dorothea that there are some inconsistencies with her story. Dorothea asks if Bert were to get a hold of the police, but John shuts her down right away before she can get the sentence out, and he says he needs to see Bert with his own eyes.
That's a good cop right there.
Yeah, because, she was going to send a letter or have somebody else make a phone call.
Yeah.
Dear officer, I'm still alive.
The end.
The end. John Cabrera also questions Dorothea on the sheds and the newer concrete slab. She acts confused when talking about the concrete, and eventually John described the circle of roses and then drew a sketch of the yard for Dorothea. This is Sacramento. Her yard is not that big. Mm-mm. And she just sits there like this confused grandma, like, what? What roses? I don't know what you're talking about. Dorothea, there's this small little section of roses. And in the video of police surveillance where they are digging up her backyard, you can see this really, really thin concrete. Like, it's so thin you can see bricks under it. And there's circles that are like 2 to 3 inches big probably, with trees planted in the cutout circles in the concrete and roses cut out in a small section. It's a very strange way. You don't plant trees. Like, you don't pour concrete and then cut a small hole and put a tree there.
It's botched.
Yes. It was like, oh, well, we only had enough money for this much concrete. This was actually a pain in the butt to pour. So we're just going to cut little circles here and plant trees and roses. And she has no idea what he's talking about.
That's her ploy.
She's just confused old lady. You can see the wheels literally turning as she's trying to answer him. John really grills Dorothea, and he's begging her to be honest. She keeps saying that she hasn't killed anyone. She says that she can't lift or pull on these bodies, and John says he agrees with that statement. Dorothea asked if he really thought that she was guilty, and John responded that he thinks Dorothea knows what's up and she had to have had a part in it. John Cabrera has to let Dorothea go, and the police interview ends with him arranging a taxi for Dorothea and John Sharp to return home. Poor John, because now Dorothea knows that he said something, because he's the only tenant that ends up at the police for interrogation as well. Mm-hmm. And now he's got to ride home in a taxi with her. I would be moving out.
I'd be like, yeah, can you drop me off at, like...
anywhere else.
Yeah, A Street, not F Street. Far away.
I went out of the alphabet neighborhood the whole way. You just leave me at any random hotel. I'm not coming back for my belongings.
In fact, I don't need a ride. I wonder if there was, at some point, Dorothea at all, like, wanted to place the blame on any of her tenants.
Absolutely.
Like, have you checked with so-and-so? Or,
she plays
he's an alcoholic.
Yeah, she plays it like, well, there's a lot of people living in this house. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't put anyone there in that grave. Mm-hmm. She tries to blame it on anybody else.
Yeah. Police continued digging up the backyard on Saturday, November 12th, 1988. Detective John Cabrera knew Dorothea wasn't the kind old lady she pretended to be on that Saturday. John stood in the backyard and looked up at the balcony to see Dorothea watching him.
Just so creepy.
Yeah, I don't like that.
She's watching him, and she had to know that her life was unraveling. He was about to dig in another spot where Dorothea knows a body is buried. So standing on the balcony, she's looking right down, probably thinking, oh snap, like his shovel is right there. So what she does is she calls John Cabrera into the house, and she asks him point blank if she's under arrest. When he says no, Dorothea says she would like to go get a cup of coffee at the hotel where her nephew, Rodrigo Ordorica, is staying. John checks with his supervisor, confirms they have no reason to hold her. They don't have any evidence to put her under arrest. So he walks her over to the hotel. And this is that iconic photo that you see of Cabrera. Dorothea's got this little pink umbrella and her handbag and this red house coat that goes down to her knees, just playing up that grandma vibe. Like, sweet little old lady walking across the street to have herself a cup of coffee because she's an ex-felon. She's getting really worked up. This whole situation's making her anxious.
Minutes after Detective John Cabrera walks Dorothea to the hotel, a second body is found. This body is obviously a more recent victim. John goes back to the hotel, but it was too late. Dorothea had entered the hotel lobby and immediately called for a taxi.
She's gone.
Reporters swarmed the house from all around the world. On Monday, November 14th, 1988, the seventh and final body was found. This body was just feet from the sidewalk. Ugh, so there was there's no witnesses.
No.
For these burials.
It's right beside the sidewalk.
In the tiniest backyard that you've ever seen.
It's front yard, it's side yard. Like, she used every available bit of yard that she had.
Was it fenced?
It's fenced, but it's only chest high.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a privacy fence. Anybody could walk by and see her.
This victim, later identified as Betty Palmer, was missing her head, hands, and feet. They have still never been found. With Dorothea on the run, the police were able to do a deep search of the 1426 F Street home. Detectives found multiple perfume bottles that cost around $110 each and silk chiffon dresses in her room. The Sacramento Bee estimated she was making $5,000 per month off her victims' Social Security checks. This would be the equivalent of $13,000 today. And adjacent to the kitchen, there was a room where an investigator found a carpet that laid on top of another carpet. When the first layer of the carpet was lifted, there was a strong, foul stench that was determined to be putrefied body fluid. It was believed this was where Dorothea prepared all of her bodies.
Not sure how the two pieces of carpet managed to keep the smell down.
Smothered it somehow.
Don't you think it would just come right up through its carpet?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it worked for her.
I would assume. Maybe that's where all the kitty litter boxes were in that room.
Gross. You do not make cat ownership sound fun at all.
I clean my kitty litter box on a weekly basis, and I only have one. My uncle, however, has 30. And he has to clean them 3 times a day or more, I think.
He has 30 cats?
Yeah, he has 30 cats. And he has 4 or 5 of them lined up on the wall. He keeps them very clean. But, I mean, it's just a lot. Mm-hmm. It can't be really good to inhale that kitty litter. And, I try to, because sometimes it's like a puff of smoke or a puff of dust or whatever.
It's got to be expensive, too. I don't think litter is cheap.
Mm-hmm.
That many cats.
This could be a whole podcast. Let's talk about kitty litter.
Corrupted Clips Kitty Litter Edition. It's coming.
We'll bring my cat. On November 17th, 1988, Dorothea was arrested in Los Angeles. She met a man in a bar, and they got to talking about Social Security. Dorothea told the man that she could help him get more money per month. He liked Dorothea, and they were supposed to go out on a date. Before the date, he recognized Dorothea from the news and called the Los Angeles Police Department. The LAPD arrested Dorothea and handed her over to John Cabrera. And when she was caught in the same damn red coat that she left in, of that picture, the iconic picture that she left in. It was a red coat, and she got caught in the same red coat.
She had no clothes. She was on the run. She just got a hotel room in LA. That's all she could do.
That man saw that red coat, and he's like, I've seen that before.
Maybe I should call the police instead of going on that date. Yeah. Which is good. Good for him. He was observant.
Yes.
The interesting thing here is that when she's arrested, Sacramento PD didn't have the funds, and they were trying to figure out how they were going to bring her from LA to Sacramento. So the press actually stepped in, and they hired a plane to bring Dorothea back. Even though she hadn't been officially indicted yet, the plane was full of press, and they were questioning her the entire plane ride back to Sacramento. So she hasn't been read her Miranda rights yet. She answered some questions from the press, but not from police. And then once John Cabrera drops Dorothea off at the Sacramento PD, he never speaks to her again. She just refuses to speak to him.
I didn't know you could refuse to talk to a police officer.
Absolutely. You can say
You think?
no. Yeah. That's your rights, girl.
I mean, I guess so, but she's a killer.
You don't talk to them. You get an attorney. Right away. Which is what she should have done as well.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into the trial, let's talk about the 7 victims that were found at the 1426 F Street home. Leona Carpenter was a sick widow who technically died from a drug overdose. Witnesses said that Leona was so ill that there was no way she could have walked across the room to consume the drugs that took her life. She was 78 years old. 65-year-old Dorothy Miller was last seen alive in October 1987. Dorothy was an Army veteran and living at the boarding house when she disappeared. Dorothea would use Dorothy's veteran ID to receive medical treatment. Toxicology reports of Dorothy's brain tissue revealed the presence of codeine, diazepam, and flurazepam. Bert Montoya was the 3rd body found, buried under a concrete basin in the backyard. He was just 52 years old. Bert's mother was still alive. She was 92 years old and had been searching for him for 13 years.
And I just have to point out poor Bert, because he was schizophrenic and he knew it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he heard the voices in his head and he knew he couldn't go to a regular, mental institute because obviously they would abuse him there. Mm-hmm. And then these other boarding houses, they were for alcoholics, which he's not an alcoholic.
He fell in between. There was no good place for him.
Mm-hmm.
Judy Moise, she takes video of him asking him about his medication and just his day-to-day life. And she would, in one of the videos, she asked him, like, do you still hear the voices in your head? Are they any louder? Are they any quieter? And he's just, yeah, like, I hear the voices. Like, he knows that it's not something typical. It's not something that should be, normal. That was just his normal.
And the medication didn't work for him.
Nope.
Or anything like that.
The people that are supposed to be helping him are shocking him. So you can see why he ran away, which is very sad. Benjamin Fink was a 55-year-old possible alcoholic living in the boarding house. Ben was staying downstairs in one of the rooms by himself. He had a bad leg and would sell plasma every week for money. Dorothea said she asked him to leave in the summer of 1988, but Ben was last seen in April 88. Dorothea told another tenant that she was taking Ben upstairs to make him feel better, and he was never seen again.
I just wish she gave him more of a chance. I wish all these victims were given another chance.
Just send them back where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
Put Bert back in the alcoholic detox home. Don't kill him.
Throw him out on the street.
Right.
That's fine.
Contact Judy, because he had somebody that cared for him. She would have taken him in. She would have helped him immediately.
Mm-hmm.
James Gallup was a tenant of the boarding house. Before moving into the boarding house, 64-year-old James had survived a brain tumor surgery and a heart attack. Another tenant overheard Dorothea telling James that he would have to leave if he wouldn't let her control his money. At a later time, James complained that the medicine Dorothea gave him was making him sleep all the time.
Having survived like a brain tumor surgery and a heart attack, and then having to be a victim of Dorothea.
Mm-hmm. The drugs were making him sleepy, which I think is a telling tale right there about what was going on. She's handing out all the medication for the tenants, and if possibly somebody was coming in drunk or had annoyed her, Lord only knows what. Did she give them more of something to just make them lay down and go to sleep? They're not a problem if they're sleeping, right?
Mm-hmm. Vera Faye Martin was a resident of the boarding house when she was 65 years old. Investigators believe Vera may have been buried alive. Patterns in the dirt around her body indicated that she may have been attempting to claw her way out of the shallow grave in the backyard. Her wristwatch was still ticking when she was discovered. Do we think that Dorothea thought she was dead and maybe dug a grave for her, and eventually, Vera just snapped out of it?
Yeah, she woke up and tried to dig her way out. Maybe. The graves were only 18 to 24 inches deep, though. It's not 6 foot deep for Vera to have to get out of.
Mm-hmm.
It may be possible that it was just shallow breathing, her heartbeat slowed down. Maybe she had a heart attack, to wake up in the yard. It's possible. She's a very recent victim. When she was found, her watch is still ticking even.
Betty Palmer was 80 years old. We don't know much about Betty. She was found without her head, feet, or hands. They have never been found.
Which is unique. This one almost seems more like a rage killing.
Yeah.
Where did her head go? Where did her feet and her hands go? The neighbors actually reported finding teeth from time to time in their yard.
Ew.
Like just being tossed over the fence. They didn't obviously know where these teeth were coming from, but they were finding human teeth in their yard. And the victims, most of them are missing teeth for whatever reason. I'm not sure what that would be. Maybe as their bodies decomposed.
Was Betty her oldest victim?
At 80 years old, I believe she was. Maybe as the bodies are breaking down, the teeth fall out first. And so maybe she was getting rid of the small things as she could. To my knowledge, they dug up the basement at 1426 and they dug up the yard at 1426, but they could really only poke around at 1200 F Street. So there could be more bodies there. We don't know. They think that Dorothea may have had upwards of 25 victims, just targeting people that have no one looking out for them. No family, no social workers to come knocking.
There was an interview of a coroner that had said there was a lady that was dropped off in a ditch once without her arms. Her arms were not connected to her body. And it was told because she had tattoos and she would have been identifiable.
Oh, yeah.
And she was murdered by like a gang or something. And that's the reason why they severed her arms. I don't know if that's in Betty Palmer's case, that she had some tattoos that were identifiable. I think it was more of just like pure rage.
Probably.
Or something along those lines. All victims had traces of Delmain and diazepam. Delmain is a prescription sedative used to treat insomnia. Delmain is not prescribed anymore. It was a pretty serious sleeping pill. None of the victims were prescribed this, but Dorothea was. Diazepam is used to treat anxiety, alcohol withdrawal, and seizures.
Dorothea was mixing Delmain into alcohol, and elderly people in general are more susceptible to Delmain.
The bodies were all severely decayed, and in several cases the internal organs had melded together into a leathery mass that looked like beef jerky. The bodies were all buried 18 to 24 inches below the surface.
The excavation video shows the coroner employees on their hands and knees with small shovels excavating the area. To their left are large bones sticking out of the ground. The video is edited to remove graphic images, so it would just be a black screen and then you can hear people talking and you can hear the excavator running in the background. At one point you can hear the excavator and someone asking the cameraman to zoom in on the wooden slats under the remains, which I thought was a really interesting comment for the police to make. You know, I can't see what they were seeing, but it made me wonder if she was putting them on like a wooden pallet, sliding them down the stairs. She is a very small lady. Like, jokes aside about her pretending to be in her 70s, she's actually in her 50s. These are big people to get down all of these stairs into the yard.
Yeah.
So maybe there was a wooden pallet. There's something wooden with slats underneath one of the victims. They also suspected that she used lime, like garden lime, or possibly lye, over the bodies and then backfilled the dirt. And that broke down the bodies, that made that leathery look to it.
Beef jerky.
Beef jerky. Several of the investigators talked about this leathery beef jerky bits that they were pulling out of the dirt. The murder trial started in neighboring Monterey County on February 9th, 1993. The trial lasted 5 months, included 3,100 exhibits. Dorothea's real age was 64 years old in 1993. Dorothea admits to burying the tenants and collecting their Social Security and disability checks. She pleads not guilty to the 9 murders.
Not guilty.
She's not guilty. She just buried them, officers. She's stealing their money, but she did not murder them. On August 26, 1993, after 24 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Dorothea was found guilty of 3 murders, but the jury was deadlocked on the other 6 murders. After her 1988 arrest, Dorothea was charged with the murders of Ruth Monroe and Everson Gilmeth, but she was only convicted of second-degree murder for Benjamin Fink, Leona Carpenter, and Dorothy Miller. The 7 tenant bodies were all the same, but the jury was stuck 11-1. One juror would just not change their opinion, so this resulted in a mistrial.
Dorothea paid them.
She was breaking bank, so maybe $13,000 a month. Dorothea was never convicted with Ruth's murder because there is no proof on if the drug overdose was a suicide or homicide. She is also never convicted with Everson's murder. On December 10th, 1993, Dorothea was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and she was sent back to Central California Women's Prison in Chowchilla. This is actually the same prison that she spent 1982 to 1985. The 24-day deliberation is still the longest in California history. Dorothea's prison had 4,000 women inmates, which was double its capacity. When Dorothea was asked what she misses most about Sacramento, Dorothea said, quote, going to church every day, cooking what I want, working in my yard, end quote.
Working in my yard.
Yes. It's so horrifying. Knowing what she did in her yard, that's what she brings up?
Yeah, I feel like she's psychotic in a way.
Or
like knowing the other side, knowing that she killed these people, and then she's just trying to play mind games.
But she's never going to admit to killing them. Or a sociopath. She just doesn't feel the emotions that normal people feel. Probably due to the abuse that she suffered as a kid. In 2004, with the help of author Shane Bugbee, Dorothea wrote and released a book titled Cooking with a Serial Killer.
Still trying to make that dough.
Oh, yeah. She's working that hustle even in prison. You can still buy this book today. It's $9.98 on Amazon. The reviews for the book's recipes are good. There is a prison tamale recipe. There's also poems and sketches that Dorothea sent to Shane. But one of the sketches was of a shovel.
Why would she draw that?
I don't know. I was just shaking my head as I read that. I also find it really interesting that it's called Cooking with a Serial Killer, even though she never admits to the murders.
Yeah.
She's only technically admitting to the theft.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Shane talked her into that because it would sell more books. It sounds better than cooking with a
Oh, she came up
thief?
with it wholeheartedly because
Okay.
she had that comment before, working in her yard.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's possible. In a 2008 interview, Dorothea was continuing the hustle. At a meeting, she asked the interviewer to buy her $115 in gifts. When asked how it feels to be known as a murderer, Dorothea responded with, quote, I don't give a shit what anyone thinks. So her true colors coming through. She's asking for gifts, and she does not give a shit what anyone thinks about her.
How's going to church, Dorothea?
Church and prison. On March 27th, 2011, Dorothea died at the age of 82. She had been in hospice with cancer. The house at 1426 F Street is still the same inside as it was in the 80s. The flooring hasn't even been replaced. New owners of the home purchased it cheap, and they knew the background of the house when they purchased it. They have signs hanging up that play on the history of the house. One of the signs says, trespassers will be drugged and buried in the yard. Another sign says, the house is innocent.
They are just soaking it all in.
They really are. I think they bought it for a steal. It takes the right kind of person to want to buy it at a steal.
Yep.
And then they play it up. I'm just not sure if it's inconsiderate to the victims.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would be offended, I think.
If it was my family member.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a little QR code on the gate of the house even that's like, scan me to answer questions that you might have, kind of a thing. They have a little free library called Dorothea's Book Spot. And for those that don't know, a little free library is like a small curbside structure with miniature libraries. The concept is take a book, leave a book. But you've got Dorothea's Book Spot.
Is that like a ha-ha for when Everson was murdered in the so-and-so
Book box?
book, coffin?
Oh, maybe. I didn't think of that. I just didn't like the name of it. Like, you can search the address and it pulls up Dorothea's Book Spot.
Yeah.
And there's the lady standing. They have a mannequin in a red coat standing on the front porch.
The one that freaking scared me. I thought it was a real woman. I was telling my husband about this. I'm like, I Googled this spot. I Google mapped it. And I kid you not, there is a little old lady in a red coat, mind you, just staring right at the Google car.
She's there all the time. She doesn't move. They have her handcuffed and everything. The house was also featured on an episode of Ghost Adventures, and it was featured on a show called Murder House Flip, Season 1, Episode 1. During that Murder House Flip show, the house was remodeled in 2020. They added a small playground in the front garden and a small carriage house over the dig sites.
And the floors were still never replaced.
Right.
Why wouldn't she replace the flooring? That's disgusting.
I think they're just playing up the fact that it's the murder house. I'm hoping that they get money from this. Like maybe this is a hustle for them, like a side gig.
I hope they don't.
I'm hoping it pays their mortgage. They live in Sacramento, for crying out loud. I'm sure their mortgage is steep. Even getting it cheap is still way more than our house is worth.
Yeah.
And it is a massive 16-bedroom house.
Mm-hmm. There are people that think Dorothea was framed. Prior to her murder arrest, Dorothea was helping women she called her granddaughters. She would help these women buy things they needed, like clothes or schooling. Some of the victims' clothes were also donated to these women. Did I read that right? Some of the victims' clothes were also donated to these women in need. Mm-hmm. The victims' clothes? Mm-hmm. What? Why didn't I realize that the first time? The victims' clothes of the tenants, the ones that died, the ones that were murdered. What?
She was taking their clothes. Well, in her mind, they didn't need it anymore.
I don't know.
And she was donating it to these women that she called her granddaughters.
Oh my gosh. She shouldn't even have their clothes.
No. Agreed. Well, what do you think happened to all of Ruth's clothes? She cleared out the whole room.
The family of Rodrigo Ordorica also believed in Dorothea's innocence.
Till the day that she dies, they believe in her innocence.
So they supported her all the way.
They were at hospice with her, believing that she was wrongfully convicted, that somebody else did this. And it does make you wonder, because she's a small-statured lady, how did she get these bodies in there by herself? We know that at some point Chief helped her, but when he's gone, she continues burying people. Mm-hmm. How?
Were some of the tenants in on it? Why didn't the tenants hear anything?
Well, some did.
Were they drugged?
Well,
Yeah, John underneath the stairs, right?
Yeah, John lived in a room under the stairs. He was a retired mortician, so he knew the smell of decomposing bodies. And on several occasions, he said that he heard banging on the stairs in the night, but he was too afraid to look. He wouldn't even open the doors. So she's dragging somebody down the stairs, or someone's helping her drag these bodies down the stairs. I would assume it was a maybe mentally disabled tenant helping her, somebody that she knew she could bully into doing what she wanted.
Yeah. Or they wouldn't understand what they're doing necessarily.
Right. I'm not sure. She had to have an accomplice. Even the police believe that there's somebody out there that knows something today, and they've just never come forward.
Well, come forward. Speak up.
Right. We want to know what happened. Mm-hmm. Dorothea is
gone.
She's gone now, so we'll never really know. Like, who put Chief in the hole? We don't know.
Which victim was Chief?
We don't know.
Oh.
We know that he was hired to help her. He dug out the floor. He tore down a shed. He dug some holes. But then he also disappears too. Never to be heard from again. Somebody out there knows what happened to him.
Man, this one was a doozy.
It was a doozy.
But I'm glad to say she's dead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to her children specifically, but...
The children that may have had a relationship with her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But she killed these people.
She did. She drugged them right down the stairs. She targeted the worst people. It's the saddest case. And it's a very unusual case because she's a female serial killer. You don't see that typically. Usually it's white men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And not little old ladies.
Who's actually in her 50s.
Mm-hmm. Our sources for this episode will be listed in our episode notes. You can reach us at corruptpod@gmail.com, corrupt.podcast on Instagram, and corrupt podcast on Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our next episodes. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Bye.
Bye.